Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Alumless. I'm your host, Ryan Catherwood, and Alumless is a Chris Marshall advancement consulting production. On the show, we discuss alumni and donor engagement strategies and other trends in university advancement. Thanks to all of our listeners who are tuning in and make Alumless part of your work week, or every other work week, as the case may be. Today, we're broadcasting live. As we often get a lively discussion going on LinkedIn comments, please be sure to say hello. Introduce yourself in the comments, and don't hesitate to ask Chris or myself a question. Better yet, ask a question to today's special guest, Nancy Merritt, Vice Chancellor for Alumni Relations at the University of Pittsburgh. If we can't get to your question during the LinkedIn Live show, we'll be sure to ask it during the bonus segment we air each week on the podcast version of Alumnus. Okay, that is enough preamble. Let's go ahead and bring in Chris to the stream. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Ryan. How are you, man? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. We actually had the chance to hang out in person this week, which was fun. I always love it when we get a chance to connect for work. And actually, it's kind of a birthday week in your household, in my household. We've got my wife Catherine and daughter Liv both had birthdays, and your son Jack had a birthday. What's going on at the Marshall residence?
It's birth day, week, and month when you're 12. Anyway, it was we had a lot going on. Today's the big birthday, though. He's got a bunch of his school classmates. His school starts next week, but he invited his school classmates, and it's Dave and Buster's Day. So we're going to play some games today. It'll be fun.
That sounds better than Chuck E. Cheese. I feel
this is the upgrade, big time.
Definitely an upgrade. I'm glad you guys are going there. I think my daughter's having a sleepover tonight, which will be fun.
Nice.
Like three or four other girls her age. She's 8. But we had a chance to connect in Raleigh, Durham this week for an opportunity to work with our friends at Duke, and I think. We try not to discuss too much about sort of the business side of CMAC, but I think listeners want sometimes to get at least a little insight in what it's like working with consultants like us. It's always great to have the chance when we meet up in person to do our work in person versus, virtually. And we're involved in a review project at Duke, and we did some discovery interviews. Later in the year, we'll be doing some strategic planning work. Those two things often go together, right? Sort of a review and then strategic planning. How do you think about that aspect of the consulting work we do?
Just a quick overview. We do about 40 different types of projects, but there are 4 that make up about 3/4 of our work, which are the one you mentioned, the review, where we look under the hood and either look at the overall program or a specific area. We do strategic planning, as you mentioned. We do survey work where we can conduct attitudinal studies of staff or alums or both. And then we do a lot of ongoing coaching, counseling work where we'll sort of be almost like a monthly retainer-like kind of thing. We're just on call for issues that they're facing. And in this case, as you said, it's not unusual for an institution to say, let's come in, look under the hood, give us a review, give us an objective third-party look at kind of how we're doing. And we provide them a document that sort of walks through a series of observations, recommendations, which will often lead then to the next step. It's either a survey happens next where we ask alums how they feel about their attitudes towards the institution. And then the last step could be often is a strategic planning project where we look at building a either university or college-wide strategic plan to help implement an alumni engagement strategy for the institution. And I believe strongly in that work happens with many, many partners across campus. It's not just what's happening in the central office. It's happening all over the campus, and trying to coordinate all that is part of the process we take people through in our strategic planning work. So, long answer to your question, but that's how it works for us.
And sometimes we do what's like an executive review, which is kind of a quick look, like a real fast sort of flash look under the hood. How long do those types of projects take?
3 to 6 months. I mean, it depends on the project and the size of the institution and how deep they want us to look. The mile wide, mile deep is typically a 3 to 6 month project. The executive assessment you described can be done in 1 or 2 months for a quick look at it. Strategic planning can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, again, depending on size and scope. So, they're usually in that range typically.
Yeah. Well, and so we get into lots of deep conversations about alumni and donor engagement strategy with the folks we work with, which is great. I mean, I know you enjoy the work as much as I do. And we get deep inside sort of the deliberations, right, of what universities are thinking about and what's happening at the core of sort of the transformation that's happening around our field. What are some of the themes that sort of come to mind when you think about how advancement organizations have been sort of evolving at this moment?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me, there are many trends you can point to. We've done sessions on them, right? So in a short answer, I'll give you the one that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about and clients are asking about is this whole notion around alignment. And just use that word, but you can think about it of alignment in a more integrated advancement model where the alumni role is more connected to the development role than ever before. That's the typical one you see, but you were also seeing a lot of places where they're combining alumni engagement and annual giving, for example. There's been trends in our industry that have gone up and down in this, and we're back at a trend where more schools are looking at that model of putting those two broad-based approaches, engagement and annual giving together. But you're also seeing alignment around donor relations. We have a client we talked to a few weeks ago where they're combining donor relations, annual giving, communications, and alumni engagement all under a new associate vice chancellor. But the one I like to think about most is the alignment. Well, before I go there, the one that your background is around careers. We're seeing that happening sporadically throughout the industry as well, where they're combining in a career services shop under the advancement operation, often combined with alumni engagement. We know of one recently that the career person, I think it was Washington and Lee University, just took their career person and put them overseeing both career and alumni, for example. Yeah. So it's not unusual, but the one I like to think about most is the one that think about your integration with all the work that happens across the university. How can alumni engagement play a role to support enrollment, retention, career-related activities, as we just mentioned, and fundraising, of course. So the most sophisticated programs I've seen out there, and I'll put in plugs later on, but are the ones that integrate across the institution, where it's where we rely on alumni to help us drive priorities and the vision for the institution. That's the highest evolved models I've seen are in that category.
And along the way, I think shops are thinking about how do we refresh the programming as well, right?
Yeah,
how do we're thinking, yes, high level, but then we're thinking about the evolution of some of the more beloved programs on campus, right? Or how to stop doing one thing in order to add a new program of one sort or another, right? And some, I think, there is a lot of emphasis in our line of work around traditions, right? And those really beloved experiences on campus, they're symbols built into them, right? They're often large celebrations. And, I think that part of the evolution of our work is thinking about, well, what's next for our beloved traditions? And we have just the guest on our show to talk about those beloved traditions, modernizing alumni traditions. And let's go ahead and bring today's special guest into the stream. Hello, Nancy Merritt. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. Nancy is the Vice Chancellor of Alumni Relations at the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the show. And I should say that although you and I just met for the first time, literally 9-10 minutes ago, you and Chris kind of go way back. I thought it would be a good place to start, just sort of sharing, the connection that you guys have. What's your origin story with Mr. Marshall?
So I was 17 years old on a pool deck in Painesville, Ohio. And Chris Marshall was there to recruit his next class of swimmers at Lehigh University. And it was on my radar as a school I was, interested in. But then I met Chris Marshall at this swim meet and I was like, I got to apply. So I always say he recruited me to come to Lehigh for swimming. And then he recruited me to work in alumni relations because after, so my sophomore year at Lehigh is when Chris left the head swim coach position and became the executive director at the Alumni Association at Lehigh. And I needed a work study job and Chris hooked me up.
And that is the beginning.
Yeah. Ryan, 6 years later, she was sitting in what was my office after I left to go into Cornell. She had my job in 6 years like that. That's how good she is.
Well, it sounds like there was some really serendipitous timing there in a couple different respects. So that's fantastic, and congratulations on your career so far. Of course, going then from Lehigh to Pittsburgh, and there was a stop in between, right? You were at
yes,
Carnegie
I was
Mellon?
at Carnegie Mellon. So so I worked my way around and up the organization at Lehigh, and then in 2014. Made the move to Carnegie Mellon and worked in their alumni association. And then in 2019, just moved down the road to University of
Forbes
Pittsburgh.
Avenue, right?
Yeah, we're literally next door neighbors.
I have been to the University of Pittsburgh. I have been inside the Cathedral of Learning.
Yeah.
I almost went to graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh, a little known story. But so I had spent a day there, a beautiful campus. It was really fun to visit. But let's dig into alumni traditions a little bit. Maybe you could sort of paint a picture of the special traditions and symbols that exist at Pitt, and sort of get us sort of thinking about traditions again.
Yeah. So because you mentioned the Cathedral of Learning, I'll talk about that one first as far as traditions and symbols are concerned. So it is our iconic building on campus. It is technically the second largest academic building in the world, the largest in the Western Hemisphere, but that doesn't sound as cool. Traditionalists will call it the Cathedral of Learning or just the Cathedral. The cool kids, the younger folks like to call it Kathy. There's a hot debate around that in the alumni community. But one of the other traditions that involves the cathedral is it's called the Victory Lights. So when the football team wins, or if Pitt wins a national championship, there's a huge light that just beams straight up from the top of the cathedral, and you can see it all around Pittsburgh. It's super cool. And there's also this other phrase that's a huge tradition here called, or people say Hail to Pitt, or H2P for short. And it's like a greeting. You see someone wearing Pitt gear, you say H2P or Hail to Pitt. I close all of my speeches saying Hail to Pitt, sign all of my emails H2P. It's a huge thing here. But the biggest tradition, the oldest tradition at Pitt, which I'm talking about today, is it's called Lantern Night. So on August 28th, we will be celebrating our 102nd Lantern Night. And what this tradition, it started out in 1921. The first dean of women, there was a dean of women at University of Pittsburgh back then. She convened all the incoming female students and held a ceremony, called it Lantern Night. And for decades following that, alumni would pass on the light of learning onto the next generation of female Pitt students. And it was a great way for alumni to be involved as well, because they would actually physically pass on the light of learning, light the incoming students' lanterns. So there was some pomp and circumstance around it. And then in 2021, so last year, we made the move to actually, instead of it being a tradition just for our incoming female students, we broadened it to include all incoming students. So that was, as you can imagine, a big change.
Yes. And so modernizing that tradition probably had its challenges then, and as well as probably ultimately a success story behind it. How do you know when to make changes on a program? How did you know that you needed to update that particular program?
So I joined Pitt in 2019. So I was able to experience the 99th Lantern Night, and it was a beautiful ceremony. We had roughly 1,200 female students there. I guarantee they will remember that experience for the rest of their life. It was very moving. But after the ceremony, I started having conversations with my staff members, with my alumni board members, and just honestly asked a lot of questions, right? So, we do this wonderful ceremony that's very labor and resource intensive for the incoming female students, but what do we do for everyone else that's excluded from participating in this? And, what do we do about students who are non-binary? What do we do? Like, how do we even invite people? Who gets invited? Do we have the data to support that? So asking a lot of questions after that event, and then inviting more conversation around it, right? And I think I had the benefit of being a fresh set of eyes to take a look at the tradition. And I wasn't necessarily emotionally invested in it. Like, I know a lot of alumni tend to be with certain traditions. So just having a lot of discussions with people who care deeply about the university, about the Alumni Association, and about this tradition. And then, 2020 came around. Obviously, a lot happened that year, and our whole country had a lot of reckoning. But after George Floyd's murder, the alumni board decided to convene a task force called the Equity and Social Justice Task Force. And one of the main themes that we focused on, so the group was charged to define what equity and social justice even means for alumni relations, but then also to take a look and assess the PAA's current programming and operations, and make recommendations for how we could be more equitable and just. So part of that conversation led to a lot of conversation around belongingness and inclusion. And then when we look at our traditions, we were looking at Lantern Night specifically. We were able to apply those discussions and principles to Lantern Night. So it kind of was a natural evolution of, when I came to Pitt, I didn't have plans to change a major tradition, right? But it kind of, I would say the times warranted it.
At the same time, Nancy, if you don't mind, Ryan, real quick, the notion of at your homecoming event having a king and queen became an issue as well, and
right.
I remember that. If that might have happened even before the Lantern Night change. I may be wrong about that, but yeah.
So, and that was another conversation we had with this group, right? And it was a conversation around the concept itself of homecoming king and queen maybe being a little antiquated. Also binary, right? It's part of the same conversation. And so, and really because it just the branding of it as homecoming king and queen, like people had a preconceived notion of what it was. If you asked any average student, like, why are we recognizing these two individuals? They would say, oh, it's just a popularity contest, right? Yeah. Whereas
pretty unpopular,
right? Whereas the Alumni Association actually had criteria and wanted to recognize students for their efforts for like building community, fostering community on campus, to inspire, continual engagement. That was totally being overshadowed because we had this branding of homecoming king and queen. So we just rebranded it. They're still homecoming court, but it's now called the Spirit of Pitt Awards.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
my guess is you got some pushback from this along the way. Now, I'm familiar with a little bit of it, but not as much as you are. So you want to share a little bit about what I'm sure you had criticism of being the woke university in Pittsburgh and all that comes with it, but
there was some of that. There was some conservative newspaper that said not nice things about me, and I was okay with that. But getting to Lantern Night specifically. So in 2020, Lantern Night, what we did, because we couldn't have the actual big events that we would normally have, right? Because of COVID.
Right.
So what we did instead is it was the 100th Lantern Night. So we branded these battery operated candles because you can't have real candles in the dormitories. But we branded these candles for Lantern Night, gave them to every single incoming student, and asked them to put it in the windows of their residence halls to kind of symbolize that community and camaraderie as a class. And then that was not controversial, right? Everyone was like, we were in the pandemic, everyone wanted to try and do whatever we could to show connection to each other. So in 2021, we actually, we invited both the freshman and sophomore classes to participate, since technically the class of 2024 didn't have their Lantern Night.
Right, they missed it, right?
Yeah. And then we also invited all students. And so, you know, it was a lot of communications, a lot of, you know, figuring out who are the people, before we make this announcement, who are the people we need to communicate with first that we know are probably going to be more sensitive to this news, to this change. And then, you know, once we communicated it, obviously there were a handful of people that were not very happy. Like, one actual quote I got from someone was, "I don't care about inclusion." And then I said, we're going to have to disagree on that point. So, you know, but it was actually all like very civil, right? Like nothing, no one was irate. No one was protesting outside my office necessarily. But I mean, people feel very deeply to this tradition, like, again, many traditions. And so they understood the rationale behind the changes because we tried to communicate that to them. But they don't have to like it, right? So
let's talk about sort of the role of traditions a little bit. You know, Chris, do all schools need traditions programs? What schools shouldn't focus on building traditions? Should there be a leveling off of our focus on, how do you think about traditions, and what schools are best served really focusing on them?
Yeah, the traditions fall into the category. If someone when I worked at Lehigh and at Cornell, if somebody on the team came to me and said, or I asked the question, why are we doing this? If the answer was only because we've always done it that way, my head would explode. And so traditions for tradition's sake aren't the answer. But to your question, I think everyone should have some form. If you don't have them, creating them is not that difficult. There are ways to create traditions. You do it a couple of times and tell everybody we've always done it, and pretty soon everybody will believe it. And you go through a 4-year cycle. You know, introduction of in an on-campus residential setting. I know we have, and shout out to the folks on the chat, by the way. Dan, good to see you on there. And Lola, thanks for your comments. And Rebecca, I think we're good to have you on here as well. Different types of institutions we're going to watch this, and some of them are going to have a harder time with it. If you don't have a football program, having a homecoming around, there's all kinds of reasons that make them difficult. But there are ways to create them, especially if they're going to be ones that welcome people to the community. And I think the most important part of it is in an inclusive way. If you do it and it's just a certain segment of a population, to me, those are the ones that need to get changed immediately and adapt and modernize. But I do think they're important. I do think every institution should create, if they don't have them, create them, and be inclusive in the work.
And it doesn't always have to be. It could be like career related, like a tradition, something that happens. Exactly. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the symbols or sacraments or
exactly. I like that. I like
different. It could be just something you do on an annual basis.
I like Dan's comment real quick, Ryan. Dan's comment: do it once, it's an event; do it twice, it's a tradition. I love that line. That's a good one.
Elise Betts at Penn says it takes 5 years to build a tradition, and they had a really interesting program that for them starts with an aerial photo of every incoming freshman class on the football field, right? And build into the student experience a progression of traditions all the way through into the alumni.
That's what their program is called. It's called Penn Traditions. And if you don't know it, go online right now and Google it and look at it. And I think it's one of the best teaching students to be alumni programs that I've seen out there. Planting the seed, as they say.
Nancy, let's talk about large on-campus events in general. I think when we think of traditions, we do think about sort of the big celebratory homecoming reunions, things of that nature. As we think about ways to scale up and engage more people, what do you think about in-person events as, or even like sort of the big ones, as a really important part of the portfolio of alumni engagement, or should we be thinking about them differently moving forward?
I think so. Having been at 3 different institutions, I think the in-person experience still is important, will always be important, but kind of how much emphasis you put on that is proportionate to like the culture of the institution, as well as how much Chris was talking about alignment earlier in a different way, but how much you can align those big, large scale in-person experiences to your goals and to your values, right? So, previously being at CMU, they are known to be very techy, very innovative, they love their online programming, right? And like one of their stories was they actually had a football game in the 90s and they tried to get people to go to it and they gave away floppy disks and everyone showed up. Right. So that just to paint a picture, right? So their kind of portfolio of programming is probably going to look a little different than a University of Pittsburgh, where, ACC school, big in athletics, people love the tailgates, love homecoming. And so it's a matter of, I think, looking at what kind of currently exists, and, assessing it, trying to look at it through fresh eyes, assessing how much it's aligned to meet your goals, if you can make tweaks to better align and meet your goals, but also look at what's missing. So one thing, when we drafted our strategic plan, and we worked with Chris on that several years ago, Pitt actually does not have a traditional reunion program, which I think is a hard. It's definitely a gap, I would say, in our alumni programming. So it's not going to happen overnight necessarily. We're putting a plan in place to kind of build up to a reunion program, but there's a lot of things that you can do around a traditional reunion program that will help meet your, data update goals, potential fundraising goals, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Chris, during your tenure as alumni leader at Lehigh and Cornell, what was your favorite tradition that you helped develop or modernize? And then if you could carry us out into our bonus segment by sharing what's happening next. It's hard to believe we're bumping up against our half an hour here already.
Wow. Great conversation, Nancy. Thank you. So real quick though, my opinion of on-campus or large-scale events is that's where you look at building depth of engagement. Breadth of engagement can happen in lots of ways through electronic, Zoom, etc. But depth, where you want the right people to be involved in that activity, is where you're going to deepen that. My favorite one was the ultimate seed planting event. Was at Lehigh. We did a first-year student alumni rally where we welcomed the incoming freshman class, and there was a 70-year tradition, something like that, where the 50-year reunion class adopts the incoming class. And the line that
it started, the class of 1899 adopted
Wow.
the class of 1949. That was the first year it
so
started.
It goes way 100 and
Yeah.
something years then. Yeah, it's even longer. But there was a line at the end of the intro where the president of the class would say, the class of 19 whatever adopted us. We're adopting you. In 50 years, you're going to adopt the next class. We won't be around. Tell them we said hello. It's like this long lineage thing. It's just this cool deepening or planting that seed, hopefully, and then deepening it. That's my favorite rally. And then to your point, we're going to wrap up here in just a minute, Ryan. I'll let you close this out fully. But Nancy, thank you for being with us. Great conversation. We're going to have another 30 minutes on our podcast. We're going to be trying in the next few weeks to get that. We've had some logistical challenges getting Sue Cunningham, who's the president of CASE, who we're going to give her a pass on doing it live. We're probably going to find any half hour she's available and record a session with Sue. That's coming up. We're probably going to skip the Labor Day weekend Friday and go right to September 16th, where we're going to bring in some colleagues that I work with. And Ryan, you're going to start working with too, Bonnie Devlin and Karen George, who are the managing principals of Washburn McGoldrick, a partner company with CMAC, talking about broad advancement issues that we're facing as an industry. So good one coming up again in a couple of weeks.
Yes, extremely exciting to have Bonnie and Karen on. Hopefully we can find a chance to have a connection with Sue. I know I think her assistant said she's traveling for, every of the next 14 weeks, like every multiple times a week. And so it's just tough to find some of those spots to book it in. But thanks for everyone for listening to the LinkedIn Live version of Alumless, and see you on the podcast. We're going to hop off now, and be sure to subscribe and listen to the rest of the conversation with myself and Chris and Nancy.
Keith,
right,
good luck tomorrow. I saw your chat comment, Keith. The Lehigh event I just described, Keith, who's on, is executing that event tomorrow night. So it's a big deal.
Yeah. That was kind of meta, right? Keith, your favorite event. We have a listener who's actually putting that on right now.
Putting it on, right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Keith, for joining us. And to the rest of you for listening, we will be back on the podcast. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.